The humble Volkswagen Golf is already well into its 8th generation, with a facelift coming along in the form of the Mark 8.5. But this is the first time I've been able to drive a Mark 8 that isn't a GTI or it isn't an R variant. This is the base model Golf. Now, the Volkswagen Golf has always been the benchmark for hatchback. It's usually really good to drive, really easy to live with, and is usually quite well built with some good features in it. It will now cost you $41,990 to buy a base model Golf here in Australia. This is called the Golf Life. And according to a review of the Golf back in an old car magazine, I want to find out if the Golf could still be considered the Rolls-Royce of regular hatchbacks. Now, we already know how much this thing costs, but let's talk about what engine you're getting, what features you're getting, how much this thing costs to run, what it's like to drive, and if it's still a good idea to buy a base model Volkswagen Golf in 2024. Now, the base model Volkswagen Golf gets a 1.4 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol motor under the hood. It makes 110 kilowatts and 250 newton meters of torque. It sends its power exclusively to the front wheels via an 8-speed automatic. It's not the dual clutch, it is a torque converter automatic, and that is something that the Australian market gets, where the Europeans get a slightly different engine and drivetrain setup. Now, the good news is that this thing is pretty economical, and these 1.4 litre motors usually don't have a lot of trouble to them because they're not overly stressed motors. But the good news is, compared to another hatchback you might be cross shopping, this thing has a turbocharger, which a lot of base model hatchbacks don't get. They usually get some form of a naturally aspirated motor, which usually makes a little bit more power, but usually less torque and can be a bit thirstier than a small turbocharged motor like this. Now, this Golf is in a standard white paint. You've also got LED lights, and you have a pretty basic setup for the body kit here. No fancy R-line body kits like you'll find on the model above this, which looks a bit more like a Golf R. But I actually prefer the clean, plain, simple look of the base model Golf compared to the R-line. You get 17-inch wheels here, and you also do get power folding mirrors. You've also got a pretty nice looking key. There's no base model key here. This is a nice weighty Mark 8 key, which also gives you keyless entry and locking. And it's all done via some very nice touch sensitive buttons, which feels far more upmarket than you expect from a base model car. Now, I will point out that this car is riding on Nexen tires, which does feel a bit base model. So if you're looking to upgrade your tires, I would probably go to a Michelin tire set, which would give this thing a bit more grip. But these base Nexen tires have been fine during my week with this car. Now, at night, this thing lights up really well because you have bright LEDs up front, you get puddle lamps underneath these mirrors, and you've also got lights around the door handles. So this feels very luxurious, again, for a base model, even at night. Now, some small details I like here on the sides, that you get Volkswagen stamped on the B pillar, and you also get Volkswagen bolts around these wheels. And these wheels do look really nice, especially considering that this is the most affordable Golf you can buy. Now, there's nothing complicated going back here. We have a black shark fin antenna, and we also do have LED lights at the rear and a single rear wiper. But I do think that this thing looks remarkably similar to the Mark 7.5, and it hasn't been a massive leap in design compared to the Mark 5 when it went to the Mark 6. But you do have to remind yourself that Volkswagen is throwing in these features because this thing does command a more premium price for a base model. So no longer is it a bargain basement car. It really wasn't ever, but you have to remember that if you're cross-shopping this with a Mazda or Hyundai, you have to look at the mid-range models to get a comparable spec to this. But let's talk about running costs, and the first running cost is fuel use. This thing has a 50-litre tank, and it demands 95 RON petrol, so it needs premium petrol because this thing is running a turbocharged motor. Now, this car claims it has a fuel usage consumption figure of around 5.8 litres per 100 kilometres, and I've seen below and above that figure, so I think that's a pretty achievable target. And Volkswagen's own trip computer said that a full tank in this thing should get you around 600 to 700 kilometres of driving range. Now, that's probably going to be a bit generous if you're driving around the city, but it means that you can probably comfortably go on a road trip on this thing, and this should sip the fuel rather than drink it all if you're going between major cities here in Australia. Now, another running cost is servicing. Volkswagen offers a 5-year unlimited kilometre warranty with all their cars, and they also offer 2 prepaid service packs. The 3-year one's going to cost you $1,550, and the 5-year service pack will cost you $2,650. This thing has to be serviced every 12 months or every 15,000 kilometres. Now, that brings me on to the productreview.com.au AU ownership score. Now, if you go to productreview.com.au, there you're going to be able to review your own car and also read reviews of people who've bought and lived with cars like the Volkswagen Golf. Now, the Mark 7.5, which this car is largely based on, scored an average of 4 out of 5 from owners who reviewed their car on productreview.com.au. Now, most people are pretty happy with their ownership experience, but some people did complain about some major mechanical faults. Here's hoping that if you keep this thing regularly serviced, and I would never recommend to run this thing over the service intervals, you always want to make sure you're within a healthy range underneath that when you go to service your car. So I always recommend an earlier service is better than a later one. Then hopefully this should stand the test of time, judging that most people have a positive experience. But yes, this doesn't score as highly as something like a Toyota Corolla, for example, which people buy purely based off its reliability. But here's hoping that the Mark 8 Golf generation is bringing in a newfound sense of reliability and improves upon what the Mark 7.5 has already built. In traditional Golf fashion, you press on the logo to open up the boot, which I've always thought is a nice touch, and you get 374 liters of boot space back here, which isn't a huge amount, but it's very usable, and it's also carpeted as well, which feels very luxurious. You have a warning triangle up here, and you have some side pockets here to store smaller items like this, or even a water bottle, for example, and then underneath the boot floor, you are getting a space saver spare tire, which is very good and nice to see on a car that costs over $40,000. We also have a hard parcel shelf here, and you can fold the seats down in a 60-40 split. But the biggest advantage of buying a Volkswagen Golf is that it gets the ski pass-through. So if you want to put skis or longer items in this car, you can, because there is a section cut out in the middle seat that you can fold down, and that will push longer items all the way through without having to sacrifice any big seats in this car. But you will lose the middle seat. And also this boot just feels so well built. Like pulling on this plastic here, that's all solid, and when you go to close this thing, that is a solid thunk. Additionally, the doors in the back feel really solid. So this car feels really well built, and even though people say the Mark 8 doesn't feel as well built as the Mark 7.5, I really can't find a point where that is obvious to me. I still feel the doors, and also these fabric seats feel really nice. They have great contrasting stitching through them, really nice bolstering as well, so it's going to be comfortable for 4 people to go on a longer road trip here. We have tri-zone climate controls as well, so in the back you can control your own temperature. You have 2 air vents back here and 2 USB-C ports. You also have plenty of pockets on the back of the seats, 2 up top and 1 map pocket. You've also got a bit of a felt lined storage bin here in the door. You have more carpet here on the rear, but then you do get some harsher plastics in the back, which sort of takes away from the nice luxurious experience we've already had. Now this passenger seat is affixed to my own seating position, and I have plenty of feet room, decent amounts of knee room, and good amounts of headroom. So as we know, Germans are quite tall, and they've definitely accounted for taller people in the back. I'm 5'11" and very comfortable, so you can easily put people who are over 6 foot in the back with no problems. You can fold down the center armrest to reveal some cup holders, and of course, like I mentioned, you can pull the ski pass-through down like this and access the boot. Now here's where things get a bit tight. This middle seat, it sucks because there is a massive transmission and exhaust tunnel here, which means that you can't put your feet on that at all if you have feet bigger than size 5, and it's just going to be a bit of a tight middle seat. But you can put 5 people in here, which is good, and they can sit in here for a short trip, but I definitely would not recommend taking your friends for a long trip in the back if you have 3 of them back here. But you do have some ISOFIX points in the back as well, so it's very easy to fit child seats in here. And you also get some nice carpeting around the entrance of the doors, so your elbow is not going to whack any hard bits of plastic. And we get some nice bright roof LED lights, which are much better than the dull yellow halogen ones like you'll find in other hatchbacks. And the windows in the back go down most of the way, which is a bit disappointing, but that is still plenty of air to get if you're sitting here in the back. The interior changes for the Mark 8 generation Golf were a bit controversial, and it's mainly about the shifter and the screen here. But let's talk about materials. We have nice soft touch materials up top, which all feels very luxurious. I like the look of the plastic trim here, which is meant to look a bit like metal, but it can sound a little bit cheap if you accidentally press on it, but most of it is built very well. You've got air vents running across the top with some touch buttons here for your parking assists and also your hazard buttons and climate controls, and you've also got an okay sized glove box. These fabric seats, very comfortable. I love sitting in them, and they have good amounts of bolstering as well, so I wouldn't really want to upgrade to leather because these breathe really well, so they're going to be good in summer. You've also got some nice small windows up front as well for good amounts amounts of visibility. This car is really easy to see out of. You've got some nice bright LED reading lights, and you've also got an auto dimming rear vision mirror in this base model. Now this screen has been controversial because it lacks any physical buttons. Every button here is a touch capacitive button, and the biggest complaint for people, which is getting changed in the facelift, was that these buttons and these sliders up top, which are below the screen, are not backlit. So that's getting a change, but I will say that after being in this interior multiple times, that you will get used to the placement of these, so that doesn't become a huge issue. And there were people at Volkswagen who told me that's literally what happened to them. They were very critical of that, but then they quickly learned and got around it. So it's actually not the worst thing, but on first impressions, it's not a good one when you can't find the volume slider or the temperature gauges at night. Now I have to say the processor feels really snappy on this screen here. It's fantastic to use, especially with wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. I actually use a lot of functions here really easy because it's not frustrating to use. And it's a lot like a smartphone because there's a home button here that you just press and it's really easy to navigate. And the climate control functions are somewhat easy to use, but you do have to learn how to use this screen because there are hidden functions when you slide up and down, and also slide from the top down as well. So you will learn the screen as you use it, but it's not as intuitive as I would have liked to seen it. So trying to ask someone to change the direction of the airflow in this car can be a bit challenging unless they know where to look. You've also got two USB-C ports here, and you have a wireless charging pad, which is very useful and does work pretty well. You've also got a nice start engine stop button here, a nice parking button there too, and you've also got this Porsche 911 style shifter, which is a little stubby shifter, but it's very easy to operate, and this awkward little storage tray, which really I never use. You've got a cup holder here that pops out with the press of a button, and a little storage area there, and a 12-volt socket, and a small amount of storage here in the center cubby. Now the driver's display is really nice as well because it's got a great amount of customization. You get a lot of information out of this car as well from that screen, and I love engaging with this. I also love the fact this thing has ambient lighting, which you can adjust through the screen, and you can set themes for the gauge cluster and also the ambient lighting, so it really feels like a nice place to spend a lot of time. Steering wheel is pretty typical. We have the new Volkswagen logo on it, and we have lots of physical buttons, which is a good thing because some of the higher end Golfs got touch capacitive, which wasn't great because when you have your hands at 9 and 3, your palms accidentally press some buttons. But here, when they're all physical, there's no issues. You've also got some gear selectors here for that 8-speed automatic transmission, but I never really use them. My only small gripes is that this sun visor doesn't really extend past here, so it's a bit annoying when you're driving long trips and the sun is blaring on your face. But does the driving experience match the build quality? With 110 kilowatts and 250 newton meters of torque, this isn't the most powerful Golf you can buy. You can buy a Golf GTI if you really need one of those. I'll tell you what though, this is not underpowered. It's not exactly the most powerful car, and if I put my foot down in 3, 2, 1, look, it doesn't throw you back in your seat, but you definitely start moving. That's because we have a turbocharger, and that makes all the difference compared to a naturally aspirated motor, which might put out similar figures, because that torque figure on a naturally aspirated motor would not be as high. And also you have to rev that motor higher to get more out of it, which results in a higher fuel consumption. So let me just quickly talk to you about the driving experience here. The Mark 8 Golf, yes, it's been ridiculed for not being as well built as the Mark 7.5, but to be honest, I'm really finding it hard to believe that. It's actually a very solid hatchback in today's market. Things about the driving experience, the steering is, yes, very light. Like, I can do this and nothing's really happening. That's just a result of modern day power steering. But this thing, it's very easy to wheel. You can knock this thing into a sport mode to get the most out of this little 1.4 litre motor, as we can demonstrate here. But yeah, it's gonna be fine for hustling through traffic, and you can even probably attempt a decent overtake, but it's not gonna be something that, yeah, you're gonna wanna do track days in or back road driving. The thing that's really impressed me here is the suspension. This thing is so softly sprung, but it feels so nice just to cruise around in. It's super plush, it's not too wallowy. Like if I go through a corner or start to move the car around, it just starts to move and lean a bit, but then it sort of hooks up a bit and then it continues through the corner. It doesn't sort of fall apart, even though it's a very comfortable suspension. We also have a nice amount of tire wall around those wheels because we have smaller alloy wheels here, which gives you additional plush to your ride, which is always a good thing. So the ride here is extremely comfortable, even when this is fully loaded with 5 adults on board, which I've tested this week, and I can tell you what, it doesn't compromise the ride and handling at all. But we want to know about fuel consumption and how much range we get out of a 50-litre tank. So we're looking at fuel consumption figures around as low as 4.9 litres per 100 is what I've seen during my drive out to this filming location, and as high as 7 to 8 litres per 100 kilometres. So it's a decent range there, but if you're doing a lot of highway driving, you should see some nice low fuel consumption figures, but then you'll see averages around 6 to 7 litres in the city. And if you fill this up, the car's indicated range as a brand new vehicle was telling me I was getting around 600 to 700 kilometres of range with my fuel tank, which is pretty impressive, especially if you're driving this on a longer trip. And applying the brakes here, you just have this smooth, steady brake feel, which is great because I was in a bit of a rush driving around all these passengers in my car, and no one was upset by the ride of this thing. They found that the braking, the acceleration, the suspension altogether just felt really smooth. There was no complaints about this thing feeling like it was too bumpy, too busy, or anything like that. Now the driver aids here, fantastic. We have blind spot monitoring, we have reversing camera, and we also do have active lane keep assist and active steering assist as well. And also check this, the turning circle's actually pretty good, and thanks to this not having any silly side skirts or bumpers or anything like that, it's got a basic body kit on it. It allows you to have a decent amount of ground clearance, especially in a slower riding hatchback like this. So I will say the driving experience and the sound isolation is also quite good too. I have to bring that up. It's actually really quiet in here. You can have a very quiet conversation even on a bit of a coarse road like this. And I don't think that you really have to upgrade the speaker system in this thing, because I think these 6 speakers plus the central speaker is actually a fine setup. So the 7-speaker system is pretty good. And look, the gearbox is super smooth. That torque converter automatic might not be everyone's first choice when driving a Golf, but it's a lot smoother than the dual clutch transmission, which is a good thing. Now here's a little known fact about me. I actually nearly bought a base model Volkswagen Golf in the Mark 7.5 generation. I was so impressed with the driving experience, the features, the fuel consumption. I actually thought, hey, this is the perfect car for me. I don't need any more car than this, and it's gonna be something I could see myself living with for a long time. Now the Mark 8 just feels like it's built upon that in all the right ways. It's got great attention to detail, it still has amazing build quality, it's really pleasant to drive, although it does lack the manual transmission that the previous generation had. That's not a huge issue considering how pleasant this thing is to drive. Now I would absolutely recommend that you use this as your benchmark when you're cross-shopping hatchbacks. Drive this first, compare everything else to it in the similar price range, because I do think this does everything really well together, and it's one of those cars that's sort of like the Goldilocks of the hatchback world, and I could see why people would refer to it as the Rolls-Royce of hatchbacks. My only main concern would be long-term reliability past the warranty period, and I guess that is a valid concern for other people who raise that question. But based off a product review owner score of 4 out of 5 for the Mark 7.5 Golf, we should hopefully see this thing being a pleasant thing to own and live with, as long as you keep this thing regularly serviced past the warranty period. But as a brand new car with a 5-year warranty and cap price servicing, I would still use this as my benchmark against other cars around this price point with similar features.